Vanessa, not only are you a food addiction therapist, you have lived experience.
Yes,
which
I do.
my listeners, my viewers would resonate with so much. I think food addiction is one of my most requested topics.
Wow.
Can we get into your lived experience?
Absolutely. Oh God, how long have we got? So yes, I have food addiction. I have multiple addictions, but I think food addiction was my I always say it's my primary, and I think I've always had it. I cannot remember not having it, and I've just always wanted more food as long as I can remember, even as a kid. I was the kid that was stealing all the sweets from my siblings. I was stealing money out of my mum's purse to buy sweets as soon as I could go to the shops when I was little. I started binging when I was little, and I would buy all these chocolate bars and go to the forest and binge on them in secret. And it just got worse and worse over the years, and I was always really switched on around food. So, say there was a kid's birthday, or even later in life, there was an event, I would always be like, what are we going to eat? It was always
what
that.
cake flavour?
Yeah. 100%. It's all about the food. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask, because I see myself already so much, that's exactly what I would do. We had this money tin and I got a can opener and I just opened to the bottom and I was able to put my fingers in and slip $5 out and I'd close it. So it would still weigh the same. And I would run down to my local deli, buy and, hide the wrappers before I got home. Yep. It is my OG addiction. OG, underneath it all. It's been my first addiction, exactly what you were saying. Yep. What were your parents like? I'm trying to grasp where this could have come from.
Oh, yeah. God, I spent so many hours trying to study this and understand this and get it, how did this happen for me? So my parents, look, I say I've always had this. I don't know whether I might have inherited that even from, older generations. I've got a German background. My grandmother was starving in the war. We've got a horrendous war history. So I'm speculating whether it's related to that. My parents themselves are not food addicted. I think there is probably some alcoholism there in the family for sure. I can see food addiction in other areas of the family. And certainly, I also have complex trauma. So there is that sense of, is it connected to the complex trauma in terms of feeling unsafe sometimes at home and then wanting to eat to regulate? Maybe there was attachment trauma. I know, for example, I had a medical trauma when I was really young as an infant, and I was separated from my parents for about 2 weeks during that time when I had to be in hospital isolated. And it could be, right, that it's, sort of trying to regulate through an outside sort of substance, right, early on in life when the brain begins to develop very, very quickly and can't find co-regulation with a caregiver. Maybe the food was just something safe to regulate with. I can only speculate.
So we don't actually know for certain, because I have my theories with myself. I grew up with what the kids call an almond mother. Do you know what that is?
No.
So very health conscious, very that's a good food, that's a bad food, always trying different diets.
Yep.
On the other end of the spectrum, I had a VB drinking dad, smoked a pack of cigs a day and lived off iced coffees. However, he would always reward me with sugar. And then my mother had a very scarcity mindset. We were also extremely working class, so we have that scarcity mindset. Anything good will not last. Do you think that could add? I've been thinking about this so much with this episode coming up. I'm like, I just want answers.
I think so. And look, this is what I find so fascinating about addiction, right? Any addiction. It's such a complex topic, and I love the complexity of it. And I think, when I talk about my own sort of origin of addiction, say attachment, injury, say, epigenetics, right, could be very different from yours because, of course, we learn things from our parents, we get conditioned, we have early exposure to foods maybe. So your dad was rewarding you with sugar, right? That means that in your brain there was this association made around, okay, whenever I have sugar, dad rewards me. So there's love. Love equals sugar kind of thing, right? So I can totally imagine that would be the case. And it's also quite well accepted now in the food addiction space that we think that if there was restriction earlier in life, say mum says, oh, you can't have that, of course you're going to go for it, right? Not only in a rebellious kind of way, but also biologically, if there is any kind of restriction, eventually then might come a binge, right?
And you see that all the time. I think I can tell which one of my friends grew up with sugar in the house because they just don't crave it. They crave the salty.
Right.
You even see it with, kids who, let's say, aren't allowed TV. As soon as they go to a house with TV, they don't talk to anyone. They're just so tuned in.
Yep.
I want to go back to what you said about the trauma. I find that fascinating. When you have your clients, is there a direct link between them going through something traumatic and then starting to binge on sugar, or is it not that simple?
Both and. So yes, that happens, and it can be much more complex and much less visible than that, much more subtle. So it does happen that people come and they say, well, something happened when I was 15 or 22 or whatever, and then it really got out of control. And I hear that a lot, right, even with other substance use disorders like, drinking and whatnot, right? So that, yeah, for sure that can happen. But more often than that, I get people who say, I've had this forever. Like, I don't know where it comes from. I've always had this. Then once we learn a little bit about their sort of upbringing, their home, it seems like the common denominator is there was some sort of an attachment, what do you call it, trauma, injury that happened or that kept happening because, parents weren't quite as available or attuned. There was no regulation. There was just the needs weren't quite met. And so then what happens is, as an infant, as a young kid, you feel unsafe. Your nervous system feels unsafe. And then no wonder that there would need to be something to help you regulate. And food is so accessible, right, when we're young. I mean, we have usually... we have access to food. So to me, it makes perfect sense that then, we would be very conditioned to seek food for safety. Yeah.
Even as you're saying that, it is also the perfect potion for alcohol addiction, for drug addiction, is that sense of not being loved or there's something amiss.
Yep.
Can I ask if you feel okay answering, how did you stop your food addiction? Obviously, this is just your lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always had this, and I was just, my weight kept going up and down my whole life. Like as soon as I turned a teenager, I was into dieting because I was like, I can't control my eating, and, I couldn't regulate what I was eating. And so over the years, it got worse and worse. And then, I think it was sort of early 30s, I was like, something's got to change. And I was in a really dire situation. I had broken up from my partner. I left my country where I was living and moved to another country for another job. And so a lot of changes happened, a lot of emotional upheaval, and my binging got really out of control to the point where I was mentally so distraught because I was like, I'm so scared. I don't know what this is. Why can't I control this? That then I sought counselling. And eventually the counsellor said, well, you should really go to like a 12-step program, like Overeaters Anonymous. And I was like, oh, I'd never heard of them. And so at this point I was living in Paris, right? And so I ended up in Paris, the city of love. Where am I?
And croissants and chocolate.
All that. I mean, I was binging so much. I would go on food safaris in that place because, how amazing is the food over there. And so, here I was. I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and it was like in Paris, in the American church in the basement, and I was like, I'm supposed to be all in the city of love and all of this, and here I am just sitting in a 12-step group. But yeah, that's how I started recovery, and that was like, I don't know, 17 years ago or something like that. And so since then I've done a lot of sort of, therapy, different healing modalities, millions of, personal development retreats, all sorts of things to kind of, improve and get into recovery more, and discovered lots of other addictions on the way, of course, right?
It's interesting that you say that you discovered other addictions, because it wasn't until I went sober that I actually sought help for my food addiction, even though that was the OG addiction.
Yep.
I want to say it feels like there is almost more stigma attached to food addiction. I feel comfortable telling people that I had an alcohol addiction more than I do food addiction. It makes me feel, when I say that, weak. It makes me feel like I have no willpower.
Yeah.
Do you find that with your clients?
Absolutely. That is the biggest sort of source of, challenge, is that people say, I'm so ashamed, I don't know why I can't do this. I mean, if you think about how many people are struggling in society with being of a higher weight, right? And they have things like, type 2 diabetes or whatnot, right? But they cannot stop eating. But they will be told by the medical professionals who don't know any better, right? Well, you should just lose weight and stop eating. And they'll say, well, but I just can't control it. So what do? They just go home and try again and fail again. And they're totally invisible. And they're so ashamed. So shame is a number one detractor of seeking help, right? In all addictions. But the trouble is with food addiction is there isn't much attention on it just yet, because it's not yet a recognized addiction. So say if you go to your GP and you said, I've got trouble with alcohol, there'll be a million programs that you can go to, like whether it's apps or whether it's therapists or, Medicare or whatnot, right? There'll be all sorts of supports. But really for food addiction, there isn't such a thing yet, because it's not yet recognized. And that's what people globally are working towards, so that it becomes more visible, so that people don't have to feel so ashamed.
Even at the beach on the weekend with my girlfriends, I was talking about this interview and I was saying to them, because I've been a lot more honest about my food addiction in the past. And I was, everyone's comfortable with my alcohol addiction now. And I was talking to them about the food noise that I have and how mean I am to myself. And I've never opened up about this. And I was saying to them, let's say I buy a cake, right? I'll eat half a cake. I'm not even kidding. I'll eat half a cake in one sitting. I'll put it in the fridge. I'm lying in bed. I think there's a cake downstairs. There's a cake downstairs. There's a cake downstairs. I have to eat it. I have to eat it. I have to eat it. I'll go downstairs and I will finish that cake.
Absolutely.
24 hours max.
Yep.
And they were disgusted. They didn't say that's disgusting, but they were horrified.
Wow.
It's like they had never heard of that food noise. And even opening up to them, I'm getting shivers talking about this. There is such shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me feel like a pig.
Yeah. Oh, I had that too. I would eat in secret at work in the toilets. Like I would buy my binge foods and just eat them in the loo, because I was so afraid. And I would hide all the wrappers and just hide all the evidence. And it's amazing, because I have that too, right? It's that sort of obsession. It's an ongoing obsession and you can't stop it. And it's like, as soon as you start a particular food, I mean, cake is a perfect example, you just will not stop. Like you won't be able to just put it away. And some people can, which I find amazing. I've never, ever in my life been able to do that, right? It's a mystery to me how people do that. I've never been able to, and I totally get the obsession. I mean, that's part of the addiction, right? It's that obsession and the compulsion. It's like these two things that sort of cycle together, and they seem to be inseparable. It's either I'm obsessing about it and then I compulsively act out, or I compulsively act out and then I continue obsessing about it. There's always something that comes first, right?
Yeah, it's that real, and I'm going to be crass, it's that real fuck it mentality.
Totally.
Fuck it. I've done it now. Fuck it. It's
Absolutely.
it's almost like me going sober, out of sight, out of mind. I can't have it in the house.
Yes.
I know that we have a bunch of questions that you guys have asked, but for my own personal selfishness, is there something I can do to help that food noise?
Yeah, such a great question. I would say two things. The first thing is that when we begin to abstain from certain foods, because, the concept of abstinence in food addiction is much different from what it is in, say, alcoholism, right? Because you can just abstain from alcohol.
Yeah, we still need to eat.
Exactly.
Put food to our mouth.
Eat, right? So in food addiction, first thing we've got to do is find a way to remain abstinent, or at least reduce the harm, the exposure of certain foods that will trigger us. So we need to figure out, what are my trigger foods, right? If we get rid of those trigger foods, or really minimize exposure, I would say I have to abstain. Some people can minimize, right? the food noise will become less because you'll have less cravings. That's the one thing. The other thing is, and by the way, this is not a quick fix. It takes time. We have to eat. It'll be 2 steps forward, 5 steps back kind of thing, right? It takes a while. But the other thing I would say is, so I work a lot with internal family systems therapy, which is a very compassionate therapy. And we always say we've got to befriend it. There's a sense of we've got to kind of surrender to it or accept it in a way, because if we try to control the food noise, we're not going to be able to do that, right? Like, you know, have you ever tried to control something in your mind and it's just like, well, it just gets worse.
It takes up so much mental space. It takes up more mental space than the initial thought.
That's right. Yeah. So befriending it and abstaining is a good...
Wait, what do you mean by befriending it?
Befriending means like, you know, when I've got in my mind like this sort of almost like a tormenting voice, right, that sort of keeps going, you know, I need the cake, I want the cake, why don't, you know, I need the cake, you know, I'm going to have it now, blah, blah, and it won't let up. If I try to stop it mentally, I can't do that. But if I sort of just soften to it a little bit, if I go, okay, I know this is you, this is that voice, yep, you're part of my addiction, I know you want that cake, we're not going to have it. You know, we sort of just are more kind of gentle inside. There's more self-compassion, also understanding that, hey, I'm having this voice inside of my head because that is part of the addictive process, right? So rather than trying to push it away, it's almost like I treat it as a part of me, right, that wants to do something for me with a positive intention, even though, of course, it's misguided.
Because I went to a hypnotherapist, Rachel Kredler. I speak really highly of her, probably about this time last year. And I went in with what I thought was binge eating, which I still think I do, but she actually diagnosed me with more so emotional eating. And now ever since we've done that, first of all, is there a difference?
Oh, it's all very subtle and it's all very deeply connected. Yeah, we can certainly talk about that, yeah.
And now that she has told me that, I can see how much my emotions control my eating. I've been binging a lot more recently because I've just moved state and I'm very lonely at the moment, not many friends. So I'm finding that, you know, the 3 p.m. treat and then the 6 p.m. treat and then the 8 p.m. treat, if I am stressed, instead of grabbing a drink, I'll run down to the deli and grab a pack of red licorice. And it's interesting, ever since she told me that, there's this direct link between my emotions.
Yes.
Let's maybe just start with the difference between the emotional eating and the binge eating.
Yeah, God. So it's so subtle. And just to say that in terms of what is the difference between binge eating and food addiction, the jury's still out. Like in terms of the research, right? People are still really talking about how do we define one versus the other. But emotional eating, look, I would say everyone eats emotionally from time to time, right? There is that typical picture of Bridget Jones' breakup with ice cream in front of the TV. I mean, you know, we all know
we all
right?
do it, yeah.
And so this is very normal, right? And I would say most people do it to an extent, and it might be not as distressing or serious, right? So everybody kind of knows every once in a while I do this, but when the emotions are better, when this particular crisis or situation subsides, I'll be okay again, right? So it's just a very light end of the spectrum, I would say. Whereas when we talk about full-blown addiction, we do all of that, but it's like there's a lot more distress inside because we can't stop it, and the behaviors become a lot more extreme and self-destructive, right? With binge eating, it's interesting because you can binge eat just for the sake of binge eating to sort of regulate yourself, right, to calm yourself, but you might not have a particular addiction to food, right? Whereas with food addiction, it usually does, not always, but usually does come with binge eating as well. But it's more about the substance, right? So you're really hooked on particular substances. And so there is that nuance between substance and the behavior of the binging. But to be honest, whilst I recognize that the researchers, you know, are talking about how do we differentiate that, how do we diagnose it differently, to me, clinically with clients or with my own lived experience, it's all so intertwined that I think, you know, it just comes part and parcel, and we just need to work together when I work with clients to sort of work out, well, what's what and how can we support you to let go of that, right?
Vanessa, with your clients, do some of them sit in front of you and they're in such denial about how bad their food addiction is? Like with alcohol, I didn't actually realise how much I had a problem until I tried to get off it.
Yes.
How does that look if they sit in front of you and you go, oh gosh, this is textbook denial?
Well, to be honest, most people who come to me are past that stage. They are so desperate. They know they've got a problem and they are like, I think I do have a food addiction. I've read your website, I've read your blogs, or, I've read the book or whatever, right? So they know about what food addiction is and they are desperate. And so whilst they might not know how bad it is, or they might not know quite how, sort of what the subtleties of it is, they kind of know, right? Whereas what happens to me more often is I see it in the world around me that people have food addiction, or quite frankly, many other addictions, but that's where the denial sits. So they're not necessarily my clients, it's just that I see them because they're not seeking help, right? The help seekers are usually the ones that are a little bit out of denial already.
Yeah. On being able to see it in the world, let's say my sister, I don't have a sister, that's why I'm trying to be safe. Let's say my sister is clearly either I've caught her binge eating and making herself throw up and all that jazz, or emotional eating to the extreme. Is there a way that we could interfere, or do we say anything, or do we leave it?
Yeah, God, it's so hard. My experience is that when we try to get somebody out of their addiction with force, it usually backfires and they'll just, become more entrenched in sort of defending their behaviors. That's my experience. However, when we care for somebody, right, of course we want to help them. So the way that I would approach it in this particular situation is I would probably open the door to say, hey, I'm here for you. I've noticed X, Y, and Z about your eating. How are you doing? If you need me, if you need help, please let me know how I can support you, so that she knows that the door is open without any sort of judgment or anything like that. Whereas if I came to her and said, hey, you really need help, I'm going to push you to go to a therapist, or I'm going to push you into, Overeaters Anonymous, highly likely that she won't go and it'll get worse. Do you see what I mean?
It's exactly like alcohol addiction.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's the same
exactly
thing.
the same.
Exactly.
Wow.
Addiction is addiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because so many, I would almost say majority of my listeners who have come from alcohol addiction or have found this podcast through alcohol addiction, every one of them writes in saying, I now have a sugar addiction.
Absolutely.
You as a therapist, do we just target sort of what's in front of us, or should we try and find the deeper meaning of sort of an abandonment wound, a lack of love wound, or is that sort of down the line in recovery?
I think it's down the line in recovery, to be honest, because, most of us, when we come into recovery from an acute addiction, or maybe several, right, it's all about, how do I stop this now? Like, I'm in a total mess. Like, I can't control my binging. Maybe if I've had, alcohol or drug addictions, like I've been, in trouble in some way with the law, right? There's all sorts of things that I need to sort out. And it's very acute. And it's also about, how do I stop myself from doing it? What skills do I need? What behaviors? How do I need to change my behaviors, my environments? All that practical stuff, I think, is so important. And we can't really kind of do anything until we've sorted that, or at least started sorting that,
so
right?
getting to neutral.
Yeah. And then, it's time for the deeper work. However, having said that, it's not that black and white. So usually what happens in my practice, it's not, right? So it's very case by case. It's like, usually what happens is a lot messier. It's not like, first we sort this out and then we do that. No, it's more about, well, this shows up, let's deal with this. But here we've got some, difficult emotions. We've got some grief. We've got some anger. We've got some pain coming up. Well, we're going to have to deal with that right now, right? So it is a bit of a mix. I always say to people, I work across two lanes. I work with the practical addiction recovery, strategies, tools, all of that. But then, I work with the deeper healing lane as well. But, it's kind of like sometimes they just work in parallel and you can't really neatly differentiate what comes first.
I want to get into our questions, but I have one top of mind because a question I get asked from my girlfriends who are becoming parents is, oh, Jules, I don't want my daughter or my son to grow up and have an alcohol addiction. What should I do differently?
Yes.
Is there something, I'm sort of a believer, and you might as a therapist just like recoil at this statement, perhaps, I don't know if like some of us are destined to become addicts, or it's passed down to us, or it's written in the stars. But is there something that a parent could do to make a safer environment for food addiction to not occur?
So many people in the professional world are asking themselves that question because, a lot of us out there now, the therapists, we're sort of treating adults. But, in terms of young people and kids, it's an area that's very underdeveloped, right? Big question. So I would say generally, of course, we want to minimize exposure, not to the point of, sort of forcing it, because then you get the sort of backlash that you were experiencing when you're talking about your mum being particularly, healthy or restrictive, right? So then you go to the thing when you can. I would say minimize exposure, but really offer amazing, beautiful, delicious meals and things that the kids can eat so that they don't necessarily miss the sugar or whatnot, right? However, of course, you won't be able to control the food environment at the school or outside of your home, right? So what do you do there? So often I talk to parents that are my clients. They might say, well, maybe we need to do some activism at the school. We need to somehow kind of, influence the food environment actually changing in schools or wherever my kids go. So that's one thing, is sort of minimize exposure and sort of give ample of delicious food so that it's actually fun and nourishing and people don't, kids don't go out looking for it. But the other thing I would say is, what can we do generally as parents? And I'm not a parent, right? So I can't really talk, but I would say we want to kind of, I suppose, support our kids as much as possible and just be loving and caring and be there for them, because when there is that connection and that deep kind of, supportive relationship, then there is maybe less of a need for addictions. But I also agree with you that somehow, is it in the stars or is it in the genes or whatnot?
Seriously.
But some people have had addictions kind of forever, so to speak, and they will go through life probably having multiple addictions.
Yeah, I was saying to one of my friends, Zoe, she has 2 kids, and she's the one that always says, oh my God, what do I do? And it sounds so corny, but I just say, just love them and make sure that they know that they are loved.
That's
and
right.
she sort of like rolls her eyes because they want practical tips. But
That's
I'm
right.
like, honestly, I feel like my addictions came from like a loss of identity and the emotional absence of parents. So it's not that easy just to say, oh, just take away the Nutella. No Mars bars in the house.
That's right. No, exactly. That's not going to work, right? That's a good idea, but really it is all about the love and the connection, right?
Is there a link between stress and trauma to food addiction?
Yeah, absolutely.
Direct, I think.
Yeah, look, it's not necessarily always the case, right? So it can be as simple as I was exposed to sugar early in life or whatever food early in life, and I just got hooked on it kind of thing. That can happen, right? However, more often than not, I find that people with addictions, whether it's food or any other addiction, why are we doing it? Not that we know that we're doing it, but we're doing it to regulate, right? What that means is the nervous system doesn't feel safe. So it's all about safety, regulation. Why do we not feel safe? Well, there must have been some sort of trauma, and I use the word trauma in a very broad and kind of loose sense. It's not like, oh, I must have had a massive assault or big event in my life. It could have been lots of little ones, like maybe an ongoing sort of home situation of not feeling quite safe at home. It's that sense of unsafety. What do I do when I feel unsafe? I need to regulate. I need to stabilize. I need to balance and I need something. So there comes the food, because food is very early on, very accessible. It's somewhere in the cupboard at home, usually,
Yeah. It's interesting that you say it, because as you're talking, I'm recalling, I have had big traumas in my life and assaults and all that jazz a little bit later in life, not throughout childhood. And I say childhood, like, I don't know, 0 to 12. And I feel like I almost, punished isn't the word, but I kind of withheld from food because I was so traumatized. But what you're like growing up, that's good food, that's bad food, we're not here for you emotionally. That was the thing that I went to food for.
Yes. Yeah.
It's so interesting.
That makes sense. And also it's important to remember this is different for everyone, right? So what I've just said might not apply to you, right? But it might have been the opposite for you, where you sort of went, well, I'm just going to withdraw from food. That's another way of coping, of regulating in a way. Isn't
True.
it? Right? Yeah.
Oh, this is the biggest one. I got asked this question about 3 times, is why do people sometimes become suddenly addicted to sugar straight after going sober from alcohol?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see it so much. When I first went into OA, I then also went to AA, and I saw all these people in AA just eating lots of, little sweets and stuff during the meetings. I was like, oh yeah. It even says that in the big book somewhere, doesn't it? Like, I can't remember what the line is, but it talks about sugar or sweets. So the way that I see that is you've probably had a sugar addiction, way before your alcohol. It's just that it took second stage once the alcohol came in, because you start drinking not at 3, but maybe you start drinking at, 12 or 15 or something like that, right? And so you've probably had a desire or some sort of, propensity for addiction, much earlier in life. And it just, once you stopped the alcohol, it just came back to you. I would suspect that's the case. Also, when we know, right, that when we've got one addiction, we usually have another or 2 or 3. And so, once you put down the one drug, of course, the brain is going to look for the dopamine somewhere else. And so where will it go? Well, of course, sugar is everywhere. So let's go to the sugar. It's just so obvious. It's so accessible.
See, I feel like I've completely fried my dopamine receptors, and hence why I probably still crave sugar. I mean, I know that this isn't your specialty, but is there any way that we can slowly start to heal that part of ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no, there is, absolutely. And I think, whilst I would say, so I'm in long-term recovery. I've had 11 and a half years of food abstinence, sobriety, all of that. But still, I have addiction. What I mean by that is I still have this sort of bend towards getting obsessive about one area of life, sort of getting into something and then going, oh, hang on, I think that was a bit of an addictive loop. Let's go this way, right? But you don't notice until you're kind of out of it again, right? It's and I have this, all the time. But I suppose it's more of a mental, internal thing nowadays, more so than, visible outside or related to particular substances. So, I mean, I think we've got to deal with every addiction in its own way, right? So with alcohol, okay, we put it down. With food, once you stop eating those substances that are particularly addictive, you can heal this. So, for example, I don't crave sugar anymore. I don't even have food noise anymore. No, I don't. But I still think about my next meal, right? I still think, oh, it's lunchtime soon. I'm going to have lunch. Yay. I'm a total foodie for sure. But I don't have that noise anymore because it's like, A, I don't crave it. And B, I know I'm going to have good food. I eat, really lovely meals every day. And also I just, what is it about not having food noise? It's just sort of fell off me. I think that's my most precious possession in my whole life, is no longer having that food noise. Yeah, it's wonderful. And so, yes, you can heal it. It can happen.
I always joke to my partner in quite, I guess, a morbid way. I always say, food noise takes up about 80% of my thoughts.
Yeah.
I can't imagine not having that. I said, I might be CEO of Apple if that brain, how boring. That's so boring to have that just in your head constantly. Yeah. Do you, with your clients, do you see them come in waves? And what I mean by that is I think I'm a young millennial, so I'm 31. I was raised with the pop stars who are about this big. I'm holding up my peaking finger. The Paris Hiltons, the Kate Mosses, the heroin sheiks, right? Yeah. We were always, the Biggest Loser was the biggest, TV. So that younger millennials, I could imagine there being like a wave of us coming through. Yes. And then now at the moment we have the party girl, the rise of the party girl, which is going back to that cocaine heroin chic. Yep. Do you see that with clients of like there's different waves of people, or is it just constant because society at the moment?
You're right. There is different waves of people. What usually my type of client is people, often women, not always. I would say 95% of my clients are women, even though I'm totally open to men. I don't know why that is. Maybe women are more help seeking. I really don't know. And they're usually, say, in their anything between 30 to, I don't know, I've got 70, right? But sort of that, 30, 40s, 50s even, right? However, what I'm noticing more recently is clients are coming in younger. Yeah, they're coming in younger and they're saying, I've got a food addiction. And what that tells me personally is, okay, there is a lot more exposure to junk food, to ultra-processed food now everywhere. And I heard this quite ridiculous statistic a while ago that, what is it, 80% of our food is ultra-processed, our diet, I mean, right? And so if you eat that kind of diet, if you grow up on that, I would be certain that you would have a type of food addiction. And many people now do, more so than we maybe did in the past. So it doesn't surprise me that younger people are coming in now. Yeah.
Is there a link between people who were raised in very fat-phobic families and food addiction?
Possibly, yes. That's just one side of it, right? So it's possible that if there were people who were, who grew up in a very restrictive environment, that, because food was restricted or there was lots of good or bad food, right, that people at some point then, when they have access to all food, they'll just go all out and they'll just lose control and develop an addiction in that way. Yes, that does exist. However, I see more often than that, what I see is the other way around, where it was always kind of around and there were, people of a higher weight in the family, right, already. And somehow, the addiction was the first thing. And then people start restricting afterwards because they lose control over their eating. Right? So it can go either way. And when working with clients, this is really important to work that out with the client because, you're kind of looking at how can we best support you? Because if we want to get abstinent, which is normally what we try to aim for with food addiction, just like with any other substance use, right? And there is that restrictive environment that you've come from, that's probably going to backfire. So how can we support you to make that a little bit gentler for you, right? So yeah, it's very important to look at that. What came first, the restriction or the addiction?
I want to know, how long do people stay with you for in therapy?
It's very different. I have people who come for 3 sessions. I have people who come for 3 years, like literally. And so what sometimes happens, and I always love when this happens, is people come and they've already done a fair bit of research and they're like, I just need your help with X, Y, and Z. And they sort of kind of already know what's going on. And so we work through it, and then I always say, you've got to have some sort of a support system, right? I run groups, so I invite them to the groups, but I also say, consider a 12-step program or some sort of a peer support network. And the ones that find community are the ones that recover best and quickest. Absolutely. And you probably know this from recovery, right? Oh my God.
It's vital.
It's so vital. I get goosebumps when I talk about it. Like, community for me was the thing, But there are also people, and those are usually the ones that have had a little bit more trauma as well. They stay for a longer time, and that's totally fine. It's very individual. Yeah.
Do you encourage your clients or people who come to you, whether that be friends or family, with food addiction, do you encourage them, I don't know if you can say this on record, but to seek out spirituality?
100%. Yeah. So it's not necessarily something that I openly sort of, advertise. Like, I don't say, you must find spirituality or you must become religious or any such thing, right? But personally, it's been vital for me. And what I would say is I would generalize it as sort of saying, well, whatever it is that is higher than yourself, something outside of yourself, we talk about the higher power or whatever it is. It's sort of like a source or a strength, an inner strength that you can rely upon when your own mind or your own self kind of fails you, if that makes sense, So it's just a stronger source of support, and it's a secure attachment relationship that you have with something higher than yourself, whatever that is for you. Yeah.
I'm totally with you, because I get a lot of people DMing me saying, okay, cool, I've done a year of sobriety. I feel like I have no purpose. I have no community. And it's hard not to push this spirituality agenda without pushing it. I almost want to give them advice to psychics I've seen or something, but I feel like that's their own journey. It's really hard. It's a tight rope to walk.
Yes.
Let me try and find one of our final questions. I mean, you've sort of answered it with your own personal story, but is food addiction, can you actually recover from it? And what is the general timeline? I think someone must be desperate to get out of it.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, you can recover from it. I'll give you my own personal example just to illustrate, right? from when I sought recovery, as in I went to counselling, then to Overeaters Anonymous, I spent many years in those 12-step programs, several of them. It took me about 5 years in OA to get my head around abstinence and to come to some sort of a thing which then flipped it for me. So I was really, I really got it. Like it really happened for me, and the food noise stopped, right? And I would say, in addition to that, I'm still in recovery, meaning that to me, it's a lifelong journey. But for my food addiction, because like I said, I've got many addictions, right? For my food addiction, it's totally dormant. It doesn't affect me at all anymore. Mm-hmm. Why? Because I have a food plan. I'm abstinent. I guard my abstinent and my food plan no matter what. Like I absolutely do not, stray from whatever it is that's on my food plan, because that's how I keep my food addiction dormant. So essentially what I'm saying is I'm recovered, but I'm not cured. As soon as you give me a piece of cake, I'll be back on square one. It won't ever, I personally, for me, I don't think it'll go away, right? I'll always have that sensitivity to food.
Vanessa, I have loved this episode. I feel like it's a bit of a selfish episode because you really helped me out today. I will put where people can book with you or follow you all in the show notes, but I really thank you for coming on today. You're our first therapist.
Wow, wonderful.
Yes,
yeah,
I'm really grateful.
It's been a joy.
It's terrible weather here in Sydney, so hopefully you guys have been able to hear us over the recording, but thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.